둘째로 질문이 있으신 분은 채팅창에 남겨주시면 워크샵 말미에 한꺼번에 답변을 드릴 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 채팅창에 글을 쓰실 때에는 모든 참석자가 볼 수 있도록 적어주시기 바랍니다. 영어로 직접 질문하시고 싶으신 분께서는 영어로 남겨주시면 강연자께서 확인 후 바로 답변을 주실 예정입니다. 셋째로, 이 웨비나는 녹화되고 있으며 추후 녹화본이 공유될 수 있습니다. 오늘 웨비나를 등록해 주신 이메일로 녹화본 링크를 모두 발송해 드릴 예정입니다. 혹시라도 메일을 받지 못하셨다면 도서관 교육 담당자에게 요청해 주시기 바랍니다. 네, 다음으로 저희가 추가 공지사항이 있어서 말씀드립니다. 드그루이터의 전자저널이 한국교육학술정보원 캐리스의 대학 라이선스 사업으로 선정되어 전국 대학에서 전자저널을 무료로 이용하실 수 있습니다. 추가로 저희가 국내 연구자들에게 오픈 액세스 저널의 논문 출판 비용 약 2,000유로를 지원해드리고 있습니다. 자세한 정보는 학술연구 정보 서비스 포털인 리스 홈페이지 방문하시면 지금 보시는 화면과 같은 공지사항이 있습니다. 네, 대상 저널은 드그루이터의 하이브리드 저널 약 290여 종, 지원 대상 드그루이터 출판사의 저널에 오픈 액세스 논문 투고를 원하는 국내 연구자, 지원 기간은 2022년 7월부터 2023년 6월까지이고요. 지원 규모는 연간 30건, 2,000유로 상당의 APC 무료 지원이 됩니다. 선착순 마감 시 지원이 종료되니까 참고해 주시고요. 신청 방법은 리스 홈페이지의 공지사항에 매뉴얼을 참조해 주시기 바랍니다. 지금 현재까지 3건 정도 그 쿠폰이 소진됐으니까 필요하신 분들은 그 리스 홈페이지 방문하셔서 매뉴얼 확인하시면서 지원해 주시기 바랍니다. 저희가 연간 30건이라고 했는데 저희가 이 사업을 2025년까지 진행을 할 예정입니다. 그래서 총 3년간 계약이 되어 있으니까 참고해 주시기 바랍니다. 네, 다음으로 오늘의 워크샵 강연자이신 데이빗 슬리만에 대해서 소개해 드리도록 하겠습니다. 데이빗 슬리만은 30년 이상 연구저널, 학술서적, 주요 참고 문헌을 출판한 경력이 있으시고 현재는 드그루이터 출판사의 시니어 저널 매니저로 재직 중입니다. 데이비드의 커리어를 살펴보면 재료과학, 물리학, 화학, 에너지, 환경과학 등 과학기술 분야의 전 세계 학술 전문가들과 함께 일해왔지만 이제는 인문사회과학을 전문가들과 함께 일하는 즐거움도 느끼고 계신다고 하시네요. 또한 요즘은 취미로 영국 신문에 축구에 관한 기사를 쓰신다고 합니다. 네, 그러면 지금부터 워크샵을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. David, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, but you have to swap the display.
Do it again.
Yeah. It's in the top left, the display settings.
All I can see is my whole screen now.
Oh, if you move your cursor up, I mean that might appear. No?
Do it again. What can you see now?
What did you do? Just now when we were doing the rehearsal, and you can see the display settings.
So what can you see there?
The notes taking thing. I can see the timer, the notes.
I can't see that at all now.
So can you see the display settings on the top left? There's nothing.
No.
I mean, if you move your cursor to all the edges, nothing will appear either.
No, I've just got full screen.
Yeah, can you just press escape on the keyboard and then just, to quit the full screen?
Yeah. Okay.
And then share again.
What can you see now?
Just the normal slides.
There it goes.
It's
And now
display settings. Yes, that's the one. Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Hey, great. Well, thank you and goodbye. No. Thank you very much. And sorry about that. As was said, my name is David Sleeman. Good morning from the UK. I'm told I speak too quickly when I get excited. And as I'm excited to be here today, I'll try and control myself. Normally, I would hold these presentations in person, and I'd encourage people to ask questions as we go along. But given this virtual format, I think it's more sensible to run through the presentations and then ask any questions at the end in the chat box, or even later on via email or LinkedIn. I hope you find the session useful, but I do realize that there are people here who will have a great deal of experience with the scientific publishing process. So I apologize to them in advance for anything that they already know about. Right, let me kill my video feed so you're looking at the slides rather than me. Right, so I sincerely hope you find this presentation useful when it comes time for you to sit down and write that Nobel Prize winning piece of research. I don't mind if it's not published by De Gruyter, just mention us in your acceptance speech. I love my job. I could talk about it for days, but unfortunately we don't have that long. I've published academic and scientific journals and books for 30 years. 20 of those years were spent with Elsevier, and I worked for other publishing companies and even ran my own company for a while. So let's look at some key facts to do with De Gruyter first, so I can introduce the company to you. The main reason I joined De Gruyter was its rich history and its reputation for putting the authors and its customers generally first. It's also eager to embrace new technologies to provide a better service for those authors, librarians, reviewers, and editors that it works with. Now, I work with these excellent professionals to bring you hundreds of De Gruyter scientific journals, thousands of books and databases in a variety of formats with numerous partners. It's also a family business still, and it puts a great deal of emphasis and importance on relationships. Now, I thought you'd like to see some figures relating to your universities, but first of all, here's a brief slide showing South Korean research output over the last 10 years, or from 2012 to 2021. And you can see this steady growth in research output. It's also important to note that the collaboration with our peers over the world throughout the world is important. And South Korean institutes collaborated with 185 countries in the world, or authors, co-authors, and other academics and researchers in 185 countries last year. Now here I've got 3 slides. Now it's not a competition. The research output depends on the size of the university, the number of different research departments within universities. But this will be shared later, so you can look at it at your leisure. But you can see that the growth in research is reflected across the 6 universities represented here today. And indeed, there's collaboration across much of the world as well. Right, let's talk about the academic landscape. This next slide might seem a little strange, but it does have a serious point. So please bear with me. So more than 2,200 years ago in the hand industry in China, the earliest woodblock printing can be traced. Johannes Gutenberg in Germany is recognized as the inventor of the modern printing press. De Gruyter was formed in 1749. Gary Starkweather invented the laser printer in 1969. And finally, Tim Berners-Lee is accredited with inventing the World Wide Web. Now, the serious point here is that over the centuries, great minds from all over the world have taken the technology and science behind the publishing industry, our industry, and collaborated to improve it. And this is what research publishing is also about. We stand on the shoulders of giants to move our fields forward so that those that follow us can say they stood on our shoulders. Now, before I go on, I recognize that representatives from a number of different research disciplines are attending today. It's impossible to tailor this presentation to everyone's precise needs, but hopefully the content I've prepared will make sense and be helpful for everyone in some way. Now, the research cycle is one I'm sure most people here are familiar with. Funding is dependent on publication, which drives more research, ultimately leading to new findings, which again need to be published. You may not be as familiar with the publishing landscape. As you can see, De Gruyter's job is to make the process run smoothly, whether this is pre-publication by managing submissions and peer reviews, or producing and archiving the content while ensuring it reaches as wide an audience as possible. I think you can see the figures involved across the whole research and science publishing industry are quite large. The 30 million or over 30 million communications between editors, authors, and publishers. There's 1 billion downloads each year. More than 40 million papers are now available, dating back to the early 19th century. 5,000 editors are appointed each year, and 500 new journals launched throughout the world. And the key figure here is more than 3 million submissions are made each year, with more than 50% of these being rejected. The growth of scholarly journals has been incredible, especially in the latter part of the last century. It seems strange that in 1789, one article suggested there could be too many journals. Unbelievably, this figure is still growing by about 3% each year. But in many ways, the growth in the number of journals is driven by the amount of research and how science develops and evolves in different directions. In 2018, 2.6 million research articles were published in the 50,000 most important journals. That's one every 12 seconds, and each one takes an average of 40 minutes to read. So why is it important to write a good paper? Well, I think that we've just seen that the competition out there is vast. So before submitting your paper, you want to make sure it's an excellent reflection of your work and presented in the most professional way. This is because it will give your chances of acceptance a greater chance. The lives of the editors and the reviewers, who are also fellow members of your community, will be made easier. And as we saw, editors and reviewers are already overloaded with work. So incomplete or poorly presented manuscripts just create a great deal of frustration for editors and reviewers, and of course annoyance as well. So you've got to give some consideration to whether you can publish your work. You know, have you found something that's unique? You know, that will excite the editors on submission. Is the work related to a current exciting or hot topic? Have you checked the latest results or research in the field before submitting it? And if you provided any solutions to difficult problems, you don't want to just highlight the problems, you want to provide the solutions. Have any findings that you have been verified? And if necessary, have controls been performed? And are the findings comprehensive, or is it incomplete? But if the answers are all yes, a good, strong manuscript is what's needed. Now, as I said, editors are overworked, so you want to make a friend of the editor. The following problems increase their frustration and can lead to rejection. So check the aims and scope of the journal. You'll find these online on the journal homepage. Every journal homepage has aims and scope outlining the content expected to be published. Again, there is a guide for authors on every journal homepage. So try to adhere to the guide to authors for that particular journal. Because of the difficulty of finding reviewers, it's a good idea to submit some suggestions for reviewers as well. They may not be used, but it would be appreciated. Once you've received comments from reviewers, and bad response or no response to their comments, again, is very frustrating and won't help your cause. So resubmission of rejected manuscripts without doing anything to them is annoying. And an inadequate standard of English. Most journals are published in the English language, so try and make sure that's of the highest possible standard. I mean, as an Englishman, I feel slightly guilty when I come to this slide and the discussion excuse me, about language. Like most of my compatriots, I'm very bad at other languages, and I'm thankful that English is the main language of written science, even if it doesn't seem fair. However, given that that is the case, it's important to stress its correct use. Editors and reviewers reject on the basis of poor English. And remember that the journal editors and reviewers come from every country on earth. English isn't necessarily their first language either, but they still insist that papers are written correctly. If you look at this quote, the bottom here, I won't read the whole thing, but it says, I don't want to waste my time or the time of my reviewers if there are more than 5 grammatical errors in the abstract. Now, that quote is from a non-native English speaker. The editor came from a European country, I believe. Now, your article needs to be of value. Why? Because, well, for you, the article's your key to the door of your research community. And for the research community, a research study is only meaningful if it's clearly understood, reproducible in some cases, it's read and it's used. So let's move on to how to write a paper. So, definition of a well-written scientific academic paper, it helps the reader easily appreciate the work and the significance of that work. It's clear, it's useful, and it has an exciting message. I go back to talking about the novelty, the uniqueness of the work you're presenting. And it's presented and constructed in a logical manner. So preparation's key, and deciding what type of article you're going to write is important. It might be a full article, what we call an original research article. It could be a review paper, or a short communication, a letter to the editor. Looking at these in turn, a full original research paper is a way of disseminating your completed research findings. So on average, and these are just averages, it's typically 8 to 10 pages, 5 figures, and about 25 references. You draft the paper and then you submit that to the appropriate journal. And it's an important part of the process when developing a research career. A review paper is a critical synthesis of a specific topic. It's often much longer than 10 pages. It'll have many more figures and about 80 plus references. More often than not, though, these will be commissioned by the journal editors themselves. But if you're invited to submit a review article, it's an excellent way to consolidate your research career. Short communications or letters are published for the quick communication of significant findings or advances. They're much shorter than full articles, and they're usually limited in length by a journal. In fact, there are also specific short communication or letters journals in some fields where authors can present their preliminary findings before developing a full-length paper. So why do we assess research performance? Well, this is to gauge return on investment. You've probably heard of the different types of bibliometrics, the impact factors, etc. They look at the quantity, the quality at various levels, and they're very often commissioned by government agencies, research funders, institutes, and publishers themselves. So they are important. The impact factor is measured by taking the total number of articles that were cited during a 2-year period, the previous 2 years, dividing it by the number of cited citations over that period as well. Cite score is a similar quality metric, and that was created by Scopus, which in turn is owned by Elsevier. It's a similar process. It's the number of citations divided by the number of papers published, but over a 3-year period. And if we look at the papers, the different types of papers that I described, we can see here the number of cites and references, citations over a period of time. You can see the review articles are much more highly cited. They've become a sort of a one-stop shop for information. They're a standard for a given field. Notes, the short communications are highly cited very early on, and then it drops away over time. And research articles aren't as highly cited as reviews, but more highly cited over a longer period than short communications. So selecting a journal, how do you choose a journal? The best advice I've ever heard is to submit to a journal that you actually read. So you've got a good feel for the journal and its culture, and also the requirements of the editors and reviewers. Excuse me. That familiarity will stand you in good stead. Other factors to consider are the aims and scope, again, excuse me, of the journal. The type of manuscript you've written, which we've just discussed, the specific subject area. It may be that there is a journal out there for a given discipline within a larger discipline. So, for example, there are chromatography journals. So instead of submitting to a general chemistry journal or even an analytical chemistry journal, it may be that there is a chromatography journal out there for you. And I'm using chemistry as an example, but that example is good for other subject areas as well. You want to consider the significance of your work. The prestige of both the journal and also the editors in the field might be of importance to you. Increasingly, the speed of publication, so from submission to publication online, is very important. And also the community that the journal is associated with. You want to reach out to your peers, to people who appreciate the work you're doing. And of course, the coverage of the journal. In some cases, it may be that a regional journal is all that's required. You may not need to move beyond national or geographic boundaries. Most journals, though, most journals that Gruyter publish are international in nature. So every journal, as I said, has a guide for authors. It will have been written by the editors, so ignore it at your peril. And remember, the guide to authors, it can change, it can evolve over time. So even if you've already submitted a paper to this journal and it's been accepted, go back, consider the guide for authors again, because if it's changed, it might cause you problems. Now, most articles should be constructed in this way, although it would be wise to take counsel from colleagues or study previously published papers in your field, because as I've said, this presentation is fairly generic. When preparing the title, the abstract, and choosing the keywords, bear in mind that these are the areas that will be used for indexing and therefore search engines. For the main body of the article, the introduction, the methods, results, and discussion, make sure that you never use more words than are actually needed. Be concise, but precise. And finally, ensure you have a conclusion, acknowledgements, references, and include any supporting materials. So let's look at each in turn. It might seem obvious, but use the title to tell your reader what the paper is all about. It's like a headline in a newspaper. It doesn't tell the full story, but it should be sufficient to attract the reader's attention and then encourage them to read a little bit more. However, as I said, keep it concise, informative, and avoid any jargon or abbreviations. Here are some title examples, both before and after revision, and some remarks from the editors. Remember, the reader also has limited time, so avoid long, unnecessary titles. Be specific and ask yourself, how would I search for this information? Put yourself in the position of the reader. And there's some criticism from an editor here. Again, they mentioned the language, English needs help. But at the bottom there, the editor says, I haven't read the paper, but suspect there is something special about these properties. Otherwise, why would you be reporting them? So it just wants clarity from the title. The abstract is like the advertisement for your journal, for your article, I beg your pardon. So once again, be specific as possible. A clear abstract will definitely influence whether your work is considered and whether an editor should invest more time or use the time of the reviewers. Keywords are your manuscripts and labels. They'll be used by indexing and abstracting services. And so avoid the use of abbreviations unless they're generally recognized. So for example, DNA, that's acceptable, but a lot of abbreviations may not be understood by others. Refer back to the guide for authors again, because that will give you some guidance. And it may have specific examples of acceptable and unacceptable abbreviations. Now, the introduction is your opportunity to convince the reader that you know why your work is useful. But don't confuse it with the results, the discussion or conclusion. What's the problem you're addressing? What are its main limitations? Are there any existing solutions? And more importantly, what do you hope to achieve? When writing up the methods, you should include detailed information so that the reader is able to replicate any experiment. But don't forget to reference previously published procedures. You'd want those who read your work to do the same for you. The results, this is where you present your essential or primary results, and you may use graphs or tables or photographs. Now, the discussion is where you can show how the results relate to the study's aims and hypotheses. You show the limitations of studies, all interpretations of your findings, and how those findings relate to other studies. Avoid making grand statements that aren't supported by the data that you're presenting, or even introduce new results or terms that haven't been mentioned in the preceding text. And finally, don't ignore work that has been published that disagrees with yours. This is your opportunity to prove your case. And so confront that work, reference it properly, and convince the reader that you are right. Now, the conclusion shouldn't merely repeat the abstract. The abstract is an overview of the paper. The conclusion should be used to highlight what you have already shown, what it means for the field, and describe applications or possible extensions from this work. With acknowledgements, you should acknowledge anyone who has assisted you with the work, but do ask their permission to be acknowledged. These people may be other researchers who have offered hands-on assistance, or someone who's provided help polishing the language or offered critical comments. And whatever you do, don't forget anyone who's provided funding and include any grant or reference numbers. Now, references, more mistakes are usually made with references than any other part of the manuscript. I've known editors who will reject otherwise good papers because they have to work through and correct a full list of references. The idea is to make a friend of the editor, not a lifelong enemy. So there are more mistakes in references than any other part of the manuscript. Remember to cite the main scientific publications on which the work's based, and don't introduce more references than are needed. Try not to use too many self-citations or excessive citations from the same region or the same institute. And as I said earlier, 25 to 30 references are appropriate for a full text article. So who's the first named author? Well, that's the person who will conduct or supervise the analysis of any data, for example, and the proper presentation and interpretation of any results. They construct the paper, they put the paper together, and they submit it to the journal. Co-authors tend to make intellectual contributions to the analysis, and they'll contribute to interpretation of data. They'll review every draft of the paper, and they must be able to present the paper, its results, and defend any implications or even discuss limitations of the study. Try to avoid leaving out any authors who should be included, but equally try not to include authors when they didn't really contribute significantly. Including someone in the office who made you coffee to keep you writing in the early hours isn't a co-author. Right, when submitting a paper, a good cover letter gets you in the editor's door. This is your main opportunity to address the editor directly. And believe me, if you assist and you convince them at this stage, you'll certainly be looked on more favorably. Let the editor know that you have approval from all your co-authors, and then explain the research, the importance of the research. If you can provide 3 or 4 suggested reviewers, this may also help, but try to choose experts from outside your own institute or even country. From conversations I've had recently, I can assure you that this is increasingly appreciated by the editors. It won't guarantee publication. They might not necessarily be used. But like elephants, editors have very good memories. So you'll be making a friend of that editor no matter what the outcome. And finally, check and check again. Ask colleagues to read your work and ask them to be critical. It's better to hear criticism from a friend and a colleague than somebody you don't know. Again, go back to the guide for authors. Have you met the requirements? And are you sure the paper is appropriate for the journal you want to submit to? Look again at the aims and scope of the journal. Conduct a final check for language, either by a native English speaker or an editing service. There are language editing services. I often say that, you know, the world is a smaller place. It's easy to reach out to your peers around the world. So it might be useful to reach out if you're uncomfortable with the language. It might be a good idea to reach out to a peer in, say, the US or Australia or Canada or the UK, and get their input and get them, you know, on both the language and also the content, and maybe introduce them as a co-author and develop a relationship as well. It's one of the benefits of what we do. Ensure that the literature that you cite is balanced, and are the significance of the results clear. And of course, finally, use a spell checker. We all do that these days. They're not infallible, but they're worth using. Now, rejection. Just like to say a few words about rejection, something I know a little bit about. The thing is, you don't take it personally. Don't despair. Every researcher has a paper rejected at some point. Read the reviewer's comments. Be self-critical. If you decide to resubmit the paper to another journal, make sure you've read that journal's guide for authors before doing so. A few years ago, I was at a conference, and one of my editors was there, and he's an 86-year-old gentleman. He was a professor at Cambridge. And while we're having coffee, he pointed to somebody on the far side of the room, and he said, "Oh, that guy has just that man has just rejected one of my papers." And I said, "Well, how can you possibly know? Because it's blind reviewed. You shouldn't know that his name. He shouldn't know your name." And he said, "I've known him all his life." He said, "I know how he writes. He rejected me." And I said, "Well, are you upset that you've been rejected?" And he said, "No." He said, "How can I be upset?" He said, "I reject papers every day. We all get rejected." So I thought that was a nice anecdote. It shows even the best people are rejected. But there are strategies to deal with rejection. It might be tempting to shut the curtains, turn out the lights, and cry quietly to yourself. But believe me, it's not the end of the world. Take a deep breath and then read the feedback that you've been given and reread it. Ask a colleague to look at the feedback so you're sure you're clear in your mind as to what's been written. Make a list of every comment made and then deal with each of them in turn, methodically in turn. If you're writing back to the editor, be considered and professional in what you write. Don't be emotional. Don't ignore any comments you might disagree with. Address them all. Ensure your response is clear and well constructed or well structured. Take your time, provide extra information or data if possible, and address any letter to the editors and reviewers. Make sure that any identification number associated with your paper is included in any correspondence. So some papers are rejected outright, completely. Some are rejected with, and they request minor or major revisions. So this is the reason you have to be methodical in what you're doing and calculated and careful in how you respond to the rejection, because there is still a chance, there may still be a chance in some cases that if you revise it properly, it will be accepted. But if it's not accepted by that journal and you submit it to another journal, you can be honest, you can be open and declare that your paper was rejected. You could name the journal. You might even want to include the referees' reports and show the new journal's editors how each comment has been addressed. Explain why you're submitting to their journal. Maybe it's more appropriate anyway. But remember that if you're submitting to another journal, there is a really, really good chance that it will end up on the desk of the original reviewer. Despite the numbers that we saw at the beginning of the presentation, research communities can be small. So if you've ignored the original feedback, there's a chance that the paper will be rejected again. Now, a few words about ethics in publishing. Submitting your papers to journals in the correct way is extremely important and can make or break a career. I really must emphasize the annoyance and sometimes even outrage felt by editors and reviewers if someone is trying to cheat, because I'm afraid that this is ultimately what being unethical is, cheating. And as I used to tell my children, cheats always get caught. It's important that everyone knows exactly what is right and what is wrong, because the editors do not accept excuses. So unethical behavior can include the falsification of results, plagiarism, duplicate or multiple submissions, redundant publications, or failure to acknowledge prior research and researchers, and inappropriate identification of all co-authors or any conflict of interest. When we talk about fabrication and falsification, fabrication is when someone makes up data and results and records them as being true. Falsification is the changing of information so that the research results are not accurately portrayed. Now, plagiarism is taking someone else's ideas, their processes, their results or words, without giving credit to the original source. By taking the credit and rewards that are really due to others, it's nothing less than theft, and it eliminates the motivation of other scientists to generate new ideas. So it has a knock-on effect to the community. Multiple submissions. Whatever you do, don't send your submission to another journal before you've received a decision on the initial submission. Competing journals do exchange information, and the editorial processes will be stopped immediately on all journals. The time wasted by editors and reviewers won't be appreciated either, and it could damage a researcher's reputation. Now, submitting a paper that has already been published elsewhere is also not acceptable, unless it's in another language. And even then, reference should be made to the first published paper, and the editors should be made aware of the history. The process of salami slicing is also not allowed, it's frowned upon. This is where multiple papers are created using research that could be published in one really good article or review. Now, the peer review process was actually introduced by researchers and academia rather than publishers. So this process has been going on for 300 years. And you know, there are some, I won't go through every word of this slide, but you know, it is a testament to the power of peer review, that work presented to the world is research presented to the world anyway, is largely ignored by the community unless it's first published in a peer-reviewed journal. So So peer review refers to the work done during the screening of the submitted manuscripts. It's a critical element of scholarly publication, and it really is one of the cornerstones of the academic process. Reviewers, for the most part, don't receive any compensation. And, you know, they do it for the good of their community, among other things. It acts as a filter, ensuring that the research is properly verified and arguably improves the quality of that research. Reviewers examine and comment on manuscripts several times to improve them prior to publication. The evaluations, usually a good reviewer will give comprehensive feedback to the author. Oops, sorry. If you're asked to act as a reviewer, look at the article and ask yourself whether it matches your own expertise. There's no point, you know, an editor may believe that the paper is suited to your area of interest, but you should be honest enough to say it doesn't, and ask the editor to find another reviewer if that's the case. Ask yourself as well if you have time to review the paper, and indeed, are there any potential conflicts of interest? You know, if the authors are members of your own department, for example, this could cause a problem. The types of peer review, so generally speaking, three types. Gruyter tends to work with double-blind review. That's where the reviewer and the author both remain anonymous. The example I gave you of the Cambridge professor who was rejected, that was a double-blind review process. That was why I asked him how he knew this other person. So a single blind review, the author doesn't get to know who the reviewers are, but the reviewers know who the author is. An open review, some people are keen on open review, but as it says, you know, it's open, so the reviewer and the authors are known to each other, or their names are revealed to each other. Excuse me. The report that the reviewer presents to the authors will provide advice for the editors as well, to help them make a decision. Ultimately, though, that decision lies with the editor. Very often you get you might have two reviewers with conflicting feedback. One might say reject, the other one might say accept. So the editor has to be the wise person in this relationship. We do like to preserve the anonymity of the reviewer. We think it's only fair. They can be open, they can be honest if they remain anonymous. It's up to the editor and indeed the publishers as well to ensure we use the best possible people for the job. The aim is to try and get a response to the author as quickly as possible. In some areas, and some of the smaller, more precise disciplines, scientific disciplines, it is difficult sometimes to get a quick response because there are fewer potential reviewers available. But in the broader areas, we aim to get reviews back within weeks. And we always ask reviewers to treat people the way that they would like to be treated as well as authors. So working together, we can achieve these objectives. Oops. Beg your pardon. Right, some advice from a journal editor to a reviewer would be to be critical, to be honest, but to justify the criticisms that are made. There's no point in just saying this is rubbish. So why is it rubbish? Be specific, help the author. So vague criticisms are unhelpful. The editors don't want information in the paper repeated because it already exists elsewhere. They ask the reviewers to check the aims and scope of the journal to ensure that the authors are complying with that information. And they also ask for a clear recommendation. They don't just want the feedback, I'll leave it to you. The reason that's been given to the reviewer is to get their opinion. Even if it's not accepted by the editor ultimately, it's a firm opinion is what's needed. Reviewers are asked to number their comments, so it makes it easy for authors to refer back to them. And they're asked to be specific, so to highlight the areas, the precise areas of the paper where they wish authors to make changes. And again, we ask them not to identify themselves. Copyright. So as an author, you've got the right under national and international law to say how your work's used. Copyright won't protect the ideas on which your work is based, but it protects the way you presented your work, your thoughts, and the written conclusions. As a copyright holder, you can then grant permission for translation or development of derivative works. So what rights do you have? Well, there are two types of journals we're considering here. Traditional subscription journals. So if you submit to a subscription journal, you have the right to use your work for academic purposes, such as teaching or other academic work. The author's rights should be clearly expressed in the publishing agreement. You'll see that in the publishing agreement, but each one differs. By giving the rights to the publisher, one of the publisher's jobs is to protect your rights as well. It's easier for a large publisher to take somebody to task if they're abusing the author's work than it is for the author to do it themselves. With open access journals, there are several different licenses, and each license will outline what the reader can do with the work. But generally, the license will outline how that work might be reproduced or distributed, or whether the work can be used for commercial purposes, for example. And finally, a top tip from me, eat chocolate. If all else fails, eat lots of chocolate. I mean, published research has actually shown that there is a correlation between chocolate consumption and winning a Nobel Prize. So the Swiss and the Swedes obviously eat more chocolate than the rest of us. And of course, while this is true information, it's a bit of fun. So anyway, thank you for your company. I think as we've seen in recent years, our planet is a small place, but when we come together, we can face any challenge. So please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I promise I'll accept your invitation and I'll ask any questions or assist you in any way I can. Thank you very much.
네, 지금까지 강연 잘 들으셨나요? 네, 오늘 굉장히 채팅창이 활발하게 진행이 되면서 오늘 다들 참석자분들도 이제 열정적으로 같이 참여해 주신 것 같아요. 저희가 지금 몇 가지 질문 사항이 들어온 게 있어서 순차적으로 답변을 드리겠습니다. 근데 그 전에 저희가 그 오늘 웨비나를 등록해 주신 분들의 이메일로 사전 질문 메일을 발송해 드렸었는데요. 거기서도 몇 가지 질문이 있었어서 먼저 그 부분에 대해서 답변 드리겠습니다. 이메일로 사전 문의가 들어온 것 중 하나가 교육학 관련 논문 투고가 가능한지요? 라고 물어보셨는데요. 네, 드그루이터 출판사는 전 주제 분야의 저널을 출판하고 있습니다. 그래서 문의 주신 교육학과 관련된 저널도 출판이 되고 있고요. 드그루이터 저널 홈페이지 www.degruiter.com으로 들어가시면 그 연구하시는 분야를 키워드로 검색하실 수가 있습니다. 그러면 이제 해당 분야의 저널들을 직접 보실 수가 있고요. 해당 저널에 당연히 논문 투고도 가능하십니다. 네, 그리고 또 하나 다른 질문은 학술지 등급은 어떻게 확인할 수 있나요? 물어보셨는데요. 학술지 등급을 확인하는 방법은 여러 가지가 있는데 그 드그루이터 저널 홈페이지에 들어가시면 그 저널에 대한 정보가 있습니다. 그래서 이 저널이 SCI나 SSCI에 등재되어 있는지 확인하실 수 있고 임팩트 팩터나 사이트 스코어 같은 것도 그 저널 홈페이지에서 모두 보실 수가 있으세요. 그래서 그 번호로 그 정보로 학술지 등급을 확인해 주시면 되겠습니다. 네, 그러면 다음은 채팅창에 있는 질문을 다 같이 보도록 하겠습니다. 네, 첫 번째 질문은 저널을 출판하면서 논문 데스크 리젝, 에디터 리뷰어 리젝을 경험하게 됐는데요. 보통 몇 번의 리젝이 평균일까요? 그리고 몇 번째부터 해당 연구는 단념하고 출판화를 포기하는 게 좋을까요? 그리고 구축된 데이터, 모델 자료를 포함해서 논문에 공개하는 것이 저널 출판의 결정에 유의미한 영향을 미치나요? 네, 이렇게 질문을 하나 해주셨고요. 또 그 리젝션 관련해서 좀 그 질문이 많으신 것 같아요. 그래서 또 하나 관련된 질문이 있었는데요. Do you have any quota of rejecting or accepting papers according to the specific area? For example, Asia, North and South America or Europe? So David, some people are very interested about the rejection. So could you please explain about the rejection experience?
Yes, you mean, sorry, is the question, do we reject papers on a geographical or national? Are you saying are there differences or?
So can you see the chat box? So I think the attendee would like to know about
right.
the quota. Yeah.
Sure. No, there's no quotas. There's no quotas at all. I think it's been interesting in my working experience. I've seen, for example, the Chinese research community has opened up over the last 2 decades, and a great deal of research has come out of China. However, it was noticeable 25 years ago. It was noticeable that the Chinese researchers hadn't been mentored in how to construct a paper and how to present papers, and the rejection rates were very high 25 years ago. But over time, the quality of the papers has improved, and now the rejection rate in China is similar to every other country. So I would say there's no quota. Sorry, do you want to carry on? Or
no. Okay,
yeah.
please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, there is no quota on geographical basis. I mean, the companies, the recognized big publishing companies all have colleagues all over the world. So, I pointed out very early on in the presentation that Gruyter have colleagues, colleagues in South Korea, but we have colleagues in America, in China, in England, in Germany, in France, in South America. So they are multinational in nature, the publishing companies. If I may continue, my feeling, and it's shared by just about everybody that I've met in my position in my company and other companies, is that intellect and ideas aren't constrained by national boundaries. There are brilliant people everywhere in the world. There are clever people everywhere in the world. Some countries, there's no doubt that some countries suffer because they don't have the investment, for example, in laboratory equipment that we might have in Seoul or we might have in London. But it doesn't make them any less clever. So, it's one of the joys of my career has been that I've been able to work with and see in action brilliant people from all over the world. So we don't. It would be crazy to reject on regional borders and things.
네.
Does that help?
Yes, yes. 네, 이제 답변 주셨는데 뭐 논문 그 리젝트 하는 거에 대해서 뭐 지역적으로 그 제한이 있거나 비율이 있거나 전혀 그런 건 아니라고 하셨고요. 또 이제 전 세계적으로 드그루이터의 그 에디터와 리뷰어들이 이제 있기 때문에 뭐 지역적으로 그런 제한은 전혀 없다고 말씀하셨습니다. So there is further question about the rejection. The researcher is studying computer and data science and has rejection experience several times. So she would like to know, so she's wondering whether she should stop that research and give up the publication. How many times if she should try more? And also she's wondering if the releasing data in modeling affects publication, because even though she included all the data in the paper, she got rejection. So could you give her any advice?
Well, I don't. There's nothing wrong with including the data and the modeling. I think the only advice I could be, and I don't know the specific paper, and I don't know which journals you've submitted to. I wouldn't give up, but I would give some consideration to the journals that you have submitted to, and as I said in my presentation, look at the aims and scope and compare the aims and scope of the journal with your paper. If you feel that the aims and scope suit your paper, and you've been rejected, what were the reviewers' comments? I think that's the other thing. What were the specific reviewers' comments? This may be something that is so specific to one person that this forum might not be a good place to discuss it. But personally, I'm happy to sort of talk to you offline when I can give you a more considered response. If that helps, we can have a Zoom call, or we can talk by LinkedIn.
Okay. 지금 강연자분께서는 포기하지 말고 계속 해보라고 말씀하시는 것 같은데요. 일단은 지금 그 제출하신 논문이 그 저널의 그 에임스 앤 스코프랑 맞는지 다시 한번 확인을 해달라고 하셨고, 그리고 그 리뷰어가 이제 준 코멘트가 있잖아요. 그 코멘트를 한 번 더 상세하게 살펴보고 다시 이제 해보라는 말씀 해주셨고요. 그리고 이제 구축한 데이터와 모델 자료를 포함해서 논문에 공개한 것은 저널 출판에 뭐 그다지 뭐 이제 문제가 없는 것 같다고 말씀해 주셨어요. 그래서 만약에 보내셨던 논문이 조금 계속 비슷한 내용으로 이제 리젝션 당하셨다면 방금 말씀하신 대로 데이비드 슬리만에게 한번 이메일로 보내봐 주시는 것도 도움이 되실 것 같습니다. 네, 답변이 충분히 되셨을까요? 네, thanks a lot이라고 해주셨고요. So there is another question about the impact factor. So we have, Gruyter have a lot of journals about engineering and energy. So could you, what is the impact factor for the Gruyter Journal for Energy and Engineering? That is the question in the chat box. Can you explain
Yeah,
that?
I saw that. I'm just trying to work out, is there a specific journal? Because the journals have different impact factors.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just looking at one now to see.
네, 저희 드그루이터
Yeah.
출판사에서 많은 출판이 전월되고 있어서 지금 몇 가지를 강연자께서 한번 찾아보려고 하시는 것 같아요.
I think I would need to know the precise title of
Yes.
the journal you're discussing, but again, I'm quite happy if the is it Yelak wishes to send me a message directly about a particular journal. I can look into it for him.
네.
Or her. Sorry, I'm not sure.
예. 네, 그래서 그 저널이 에너지와 엔지니어링을 주제로 하는 저널이 상당히 많기 때문에 특정 저널에 대한 임팩트 팩터가 알고 싶으시면 그 드그루이터 저널 홈페이지 들어가셔서 그 저널 인포메이션 보면은 다 나오거든요. 그래서 거기서 확인해 주시는 게 좋을 것 같습니다. 네, 혹시 다른 질문 있으실까요? David, there is another question. Can you share your skills or insight as a reviewer?
In what ways? Sorry.
네, 어떤 의미로 어떤 인사이트랑 어떤 기술에 대해서 물어보시는 건가요? 논문 제출하는 거에 대해서 말씀하시는 건가요?
It's important to note that I am the publisher, not the reviewer. So I work with the reviewers. I'm not a reviewer myself. I talk to reviewers all the time. I talk to editors, but I don't review papers.
아, 네네. 그 데이비드는 리뷰를 하는 사람은 아니고 리뷰어와 에디터와 함께 이제 논의를 해서 출판을 하는 사람이라서 그 리뷰어로서는 직접적인 조언을 해주기는 조금 어려울 것 같다는 답변 해주셨어요. 괜찮으실까요? 아, 네. 혹시 어떤 질문을 좀 더 다른 질문 해주셔도 괜찮습니다. 아니면 제가 다른 대학교에서 나왔던 질문 몇 가지 또 한번 공유해드리는 것도 괜찮을 것 같아요. 그 다른 대학에서는 그 SCI와 같은 이렇게 그 등재된 저널에 논문을 투고할 경우 실제로 출판까지 걸리는 시간이 얼마나 되는지에 대해서 문의를 하셨었어요. 그래서 그 부분에 대해서 저희가 이제 데이비드에게 물어봤었는데 이거는 이제 그 제출하시는 논문이 어떤 그 학계 커뮤니티에 속해 있느냐에 따라 다르다고 하더라고요. 그래서 이제 그 에디터한테 논문을 제출하시고 이 에디터가 이제 다른 리뷰어들한테 이거 자료 괜찮은 것 같으니까 리뷰를 해줘라 이렇게 이제 리뷰어들한테 보내야 되잖아요. 그래서 리뷰어들이 보내준 그 페이퍼를 받고 충분히 검토를 하고 이제 그 시간에 따라서 그 출판되는 시간이 다르다고 하더라고요. 그리고 또 이제 사회과학 분야나 뭐 의학 분야냐 아니면 뭐 STM 그 사이언스 테크놀로지 분야냐 이거에 따라서도 그 리뷰하는 시간이 다르기 때문에 그 출판되는 시간은 논문마다 다르다고 말씀을 해주셨고 보통 이제 그 요즘 과학기술 분야 같은 경우는 굉장히 빠르게 이제 토픽들이 변하잖아요. 그래서 에디터가 특정 저널에 대한 그 논문이 굉장히 획기적인 내용이 나오고 빨리 출판해서 이거를 학계에 공유하고 싶다 하면은 빠르게 뭐 2주 정도 만에 그 출판이 되는 경우도 있고요. 또 이제 사회과학 분야 같은 경우는 이제 리뷰를 많이 거쳐야 하는 경우는 몇 달이 걸리는 경우도 있다고 하셨습니다. 네, 연구하시는 분들께 도움이 되셨으면 하는 그 마음으로 말씀드렸고요. 또 혹시 추가 질문 있으시면 계속 채팅창에 올려주시기 바랍니다. David, there is another question. What if the editor would not respond to my email contacts for long?
What if the editor would not respond to the email? I would contact, because if you've submitted your paper to the journal and the editor isn't contacting you, I would suggest contact the publisher, so somebody like me, to contact the editor, because it could be that there's some sort of crisis that the author doesn't know about, you know, the editor is ill or something like that. And but if you're not getting any response at all, that makes it difficult, because you can't submit to another journal until you've received a response. So I would contact the publisher and say, can you help me? I'm not receiving a response.
에디터한테 이메일을 보냈는데 답변이 오랫동안 안 올 경우 어떻게 해야 되냐라고 이제 질문해 주셨는데, 그럴 경우에는 바로 출판사에 문의를 하라고 말씀해 주셨습니다. 네, 출판사 사이트 가시면은 헬프데스크도 있고 다 있습니다. 이메일 주소가. 그래서 그쪽으로 이메일 보내주시면 누군가가 답변으로 도와주실 수 있을 것입니다. 네, 또 다른 질문 있으실까요?
Sometimes it depends on the area, on the subject area, but sometimes a journal will have thousands of submissions every year to deal with, and it is difficult for, if there's a group of 8 editors dealing with thousands, it's difficult for them to respond too quickly.
Yes. 네, 또 이제 추가적으로 답변 주셨는데, 어떤 분야를 연구하냐에 따라서 그 저널 에디터는 몇 명이 되지 않는데 수천 건의 논문이 제출되기 때문에 그거를 보는 시간이 오래 걸려서 답변을 못 주는 걸 수도 있다고 답변해 주셨습니다. 네, 오늘 참석자분들은 아무래도 6개 대학에서 통합으로 진행하다 보니까 굉장히 다들 열정적이신 것 같아요. 모두에게 굉장히 유용한 시간인 것 같습니다. 네, 계속적으로 질문이 있으시면 저희가 3시 반까지는 시간이 있거든요. 그래서 질문 계속 올려주시기 바랍니다. 네, 그러면 제가 또 다른 대학에서 나왔던 질문 한 가지 더 공유를 해드리려고 하는데요. 이분 같은 경우는 이미 논문을 출판 한번 하신 경험이 있으신 분이었어요. 그런데 이미 출판했던 내용의 약간 확장판으로 연구를 조금 더 했다고 하시더라고요. 그래서 똑같이 연구한 부분에 대한 확장판을 같은 저널에 논문을 제출해도 되냐고 문의를 하신 적이 있었는데, 그럴 경우 데이비드 같은 경우는 가능하다고 얘기를 해주셨고, 대신에 에디터에게 이제 이 저널이 언제 논문이 제출됐던 것인데 확장판으로 제출하라고 한다. 이제 그 내용을 충분히 투명하게 밝히라고 말씀을 해주셨습니다. 혹시 또 다른 질문 없으실까요? 네, 그러시면 뭐 조금 쑥스러우셔서 이제 그 질문을 안 해주시는 분들도 있어서, 아까도 이제 보여드렸던 데이비드 이메일 주소 있잖아요. 제가 화면 공유 다시 한번 보여드리면, 네, 데이비드 이메일 주소가 네, 데이비드 이메일 주소 여기 나오고 있죠. david.sleiman@gruyter.com 이쪽으로 이제 보내주시면 됩니다. 그리고 마지막으로 제가 저희 캐리스 대학 라이선스로 아까 말씀드렸던 APC 쿠폰 말씀드렸잖아요. 캐리스에서 이제 한국 교육부 산하의 한국교육학술정보원에서 그 APC 쿠폰 30건 지금 국내 연구자들께 제공해드리고 있습니다. 그래서 드그루이터 홈페이지 들어가셔서 그 논문 제출만 할 만한 저널이 있는지 한번 살펴봐 주시고요. 그 모든 연구자분들께 그 논문 출판 오픈 액세스 논문 출판 원하시는 분들께서 네, 그 해당 쿠폰 사용하셨으면 좋겠습니다. 그러면 오늘 이 정도로 하도록 하고요. 오늘 워크샵이 모든 학우 및 교수진 여러분께 유용한 시간이 되었기를 바랍니다. 아까도 말씀드렸지만 저희 드그루이터 이 저널 지금 모든 대학에서 제공되고 있으니까 도서관 홈페이지 통해서 많은 이용 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다. David, I think we can cover all the questions, so please say goodbye to everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time. Have a lovely evening. And I'll start my day now.
Okay. Thank you. Bye bye. 감사합니다.
Bye-bye, everybody.